Our next presenter is the archivist for the Humboldt County Historical Society, a historian and a graduate from Humboldt State University. Jim Garrison has really done so much for the Historical Society. I don't even know where to begin with his incredible contributions. He's locally raised Air Force veteran, graduate of Humboldt State, published historian, and his topic for today, and he'd be your first line of research if you're contacting the Historical Society to research any single topic. He's memorizing every drawer that we have up there. His topic for today is Humboldt's Lost Treasures. Jim Garrison.
Thank you. See if I can figure out how to run this thing. Left click, okay. So, I was asked recently whether I thought that Humboldt County did a good job preserving our history. I've given this question a lot of thought, and I decided to give us a B-, maybe a C+. We're doing well, passing well, not the best, but not the worst either. We have something like 7 museums and a great many historically minded groups, organizations, and societies within the county. We have an impressive number of Victorian-era structures gracing our towns and cities. The Historical Society has many tens of thousands of photographs, documents, maps, ledgers, and ephemera. The Clark Museum has thousands of artifacts from Humboldt's rich history. All of these things were donated by community members concerned about the preservation of our county's history. In many respects, from this grassroots level, we're doing really well. We could give ourselves a pat on the back, but we should be careful not to sprain anything because we have some stains on our record as well. So I'd like to take a look at some of the things, quick look, because I got a lot of things, not a lot of time, but take a look at some of the things we might regret not having saved. Some of these, most of these are structures, some are monuments, but some of these were torn down, others burned, still others were neglected to death. I've got quite a few on my list, so let's see how many we can get through. The first regrettable demolition, of course, is the Humboldt County Courthouse. The first of the 1 million or so bricks it took to build this were laid on May 29th of 1885. The building was completed in 1889. It was built with locally sourced materials. Bricks were made at John DePoy's Brickyard, which lay in the gulch west of Myrtle Grove Cemetery here in Eureka. The granite and gravel came from the Mad River area and the sand from the North Spit. Courthouse cornerstone was laid, accompanied by a parade and much fanfare. The cornerstone held a time capsule, which included a Bible, copy of the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution, and constitutions and bylaws of many of the local fraternal orders. It also included photographs of prominent local citizens and a bunch of other ephemera. The courthouse, as you can see, was decorated with 13 Roman goddesses. The statues were made of zinc. They were painted gray and coated with sand to appear stone-like. Among them were Minerva, who faced south from the building's highest peak. Other statues represented the goddess Ceres, Flora, Fortuna, Juno, and Justice. Justice was on all 4 corners, or all 4 sides, I should say, excuse me. The courthouse and its 13 statues were damaged in the 1906 earthquake, and this resulted in the removal of the goddesses. Where'd they go? Were they scrapped? Does anyone know? I don't. In 1924, a painter's blowtorch started a fire in the courthouse tower, caused $60,000 in damages, and required the replacement of the dome, which became something much less than a dome. Coincidentally, the Masonic building at 2nd and G Streets, which had recently been purchased by the Moose Lodge, burned that same day. I guess the fire department was probably busy at the courthouse. By the late 1940s, the tower section was deemed too dangerous and was removed in 1950. And that's the wrong building. Sorry. We're going to look at it for a minute and we'll pretend. That's City Hall, right, Mike? It's the wrong building, sorry. But after sustaining heavy damages in an earthquake in 1954, the courthouse was declared unsafe and was demolished in '56. The 1950s were an era of replacing old ornate buildings with modern, plain, unadorned, and utilitarian structures. Luckily, the Seth Thomas clock that was in the tower of the courthouse was rescued from demolition by Dr. Hindley in Ferndale, and it's been gathering dust in a forgotten back corner of the museum at the fairgrounds ever since. The next regrettable disposal I'd like to look at is Eureka streetcars. The first streetcar company in Eureka began in 1887 or 8, and it utilized horse-drawn trolleys. Streetcars caught on fast, and eventually Eureka had an electric streetcar company that expanded to serve much of the city. They were very popular and came to be a relied upon form of transportation in the city. Through a few different owners and a few changing technologies, Eureka streetcars continued to serve until the 1940s. When the company faced insurmountable financial troubles, the city stepped in to operate the service. Streetcars were an important part of the transportation infrastructure and made it possible for mill workers to make it to work from any part of town. The city eventually decided to abandon the streetcar lines, but they did face some small opposition from local citizens, as this newspaper ad points out. A contract for city bus line was awarded, and the death knell struck for the doomed streetcar system. Here they are being scrapped, or at least the parts that are scrappable. Notice all the metal wheels on the bottom are gone already there. The last hurrah for these streetcars came on February 23rd, 1940, with a parade and the burning of car number 18 on 5th Street. This was to the accompaniment of a band and an enthusiastic crowd. The fire nearly got out of control before firefighters could respond. Although you can see a fire pumper right there. It's almost like they were ready for it. I can't believe that we're still using that old of fire equipment in 1940. Next up's the Sequoia Yacht and Boating Club, which began with 11 boat owners in 1906, and the club only lasted until 1925. The first floor was a boat and locker room, while the upstairs had facilities for dining and lounging. A sightseeing deck gave an excellent view of the bay. There was a fine dance hall where parties were enjoyed by the members. The club also had tennis courts and a heated swimming pool, which was open to the community. I think this is the only picture of the pool I've ever seen. At one point, though, there was a discussion about discontinuing Ladies' Day at the pool because it started to draw too many undesirable female residents from Eureka's 2nd Street section. So the Sequoia Yacht Club and yachting for sport was very popular in the years before World War I. However, this waned in the post-war days of Prohibition, perhaps replaced by other pursuits. Maybe bootlegging and car racing, perhaps. At one point, the clubhouse suffered a fire and was eventually abandoned to the elements. The rusty remains of the boiler from the swimming pool can still be seen laying on the beach on the south side of Indian Island. Next up is the Humboldt Bay woolen mills on Broadway and 14th, or near there. Beginning in the 1890s, Humboldt County's wool industry grew and prospered, and by the turn of the century, Humboldt County was shipping out 500,000 pounds of wool each year. In 1901, the Humboldt Bay woolen mill was built and manufactured woolen fabrics there until it closed after World War II. The mill was described as an excellent example of Greek Revival architecture and one of the few industrial buildings historically not associated with timber or fishing. The woolen mill sat empty and unused for many years before it was listed on the National Register of Historic Sites on 25th June 1982. Shamefully, it only lasted 5 more years after that. After the city of Eureka designated a dangerous building in '87, local preservationists and the Eureka Heritage Society tried to get funding to rehabilitate it, but it was torn down that same year before funding could be secured. And then there's the Stump House. In 1903, Rodney Burns built the Stump House. For most of the 20th century, it stood as a highly recognizable feature of Eureka and of Humboldt County. Uncounted thousands of postcards are still floating around in collections all over the world. Right, Steve? The Stump House wasn't just your everyday run-of-the-mill tourist attraction, burl shop, and sometime cheese boutique. It was unique in its construction as well. The Stump House was built using rounds taken from the Fieldbrook giant, the tree from which the Lord William Astor famous slab was taken. If you don't know this story, come see me at the Historical Society. It's a good one. The Stump House was damaged in a fire in the late 1990s and was demolished. While the long-standing Eureka icon is gone forever, one slab end survives. And the last of the Fieldbrook giant slabs, in the United States anyway, can be seen at the Blue Ox Mill Works. Eureka's full of these hard luck stories. We've lost as many of our grand historic or landmark structures as we've saved. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through a few of these pretty quickly. If I can make the clicker work. There we go. City Hall, corner of 3rd and G Streets, built in 1905, torn down in the 50s after being damaged by an earthquake. Humboldt County Jail, 4th and J Streets. Humboldt County Historical Society tried unsuccessfully to acquire this one in the 1960s. However, it was turned into a super convenient parking lot instead. You'll find a lot of these buildings have super convenient parking lots attached to them. Dolbear and Carson Sawmill. For many years, this was a Eureka landmark. Carson's Mill was eventually torn down and replaced with the Adorney Center, Halverson Park, and the County Library. So not all bad, I guess. Just different. This one's bad. Occidental Pavilion, 2nd and A Street. This is built around the turn of the 20th century and torn down around 1940. It was a beautiful hall. They held dances and skating and many other events during its heyday. Ingomar Theater opened December 22nd, 1892 on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the Carson Block at 3rd and F Streets. The theater was dismantled sometime in the 1950s and used for storage space. Promising news here is that the possibility for restoration exists. The Carson Block's been restored recently, and with enough funding, the theater could be put back together. Who knows? If anyone's got some millions they want to throw on there, I'm sure somebody will listen. Humboldt Brewing Company on Broadway near West Henderson. This building was completed in 1907 and demolished sometime around the 1960s. It was a great building. Sure, we could have put it to some use. The Shipwreck. This one's a little newer than some of the others, but still neat. This opened in 1960. It had been converted to feature a museum and an aquarium and had a top deck cafe. It also had a very clever octopus who escaped his tank regularly. Laws banning billboard advertisement in the area drove the attraction out of business, and the Shipwreck sat vacant until burning in the 90s. Just so I don't ignore the rest of the county, let's take a look at some things a little further south here. Since the demise of Pacific Lumber Company, the town of Scotia has undergone significant changes. No longer a company-owned town with company-owned bills, the town has started to face some challenges in maintaining some of their historic resources. The locomotive, with fond memories for so many of us who grew up in that area, has been sold and taken out of the county. Thankfully, the steam donkey and the other steam equipment there are at the THA to be preserved here in the county. Good job, THA. The Scotia Museum has been closed for the last 2 years or more, and its wonderful displays are shuttered away, and I don't think that building has heat. I've been told recently. The Wainema Theater, one of the hidden jewels of Humboldt County's architecture. Anybody who's walked into that building knows it's a cathedral. It's beautiful. They're struggling to find funding to replace the badly leaking roof. Scotia Hospital has been used as a storage unit for timber company records since the hospital's closure in the 1950s. It's beginning to show signs of needing some care. As the first hospital south of Eureka, this building holds a tremendous historical importance to the county. Additionally, the records that are housed within it are themselves an important piece of our county's history, and they will need to be preserved and made accessible to researchers. The Scotia Inn has been shuttered for the past several years as well, and like the Scotia Hospital, it's currently for sale. We can only hope that these historic buildings can be purchased by parties interested in preserving them. These are important historical landmarks that our county and our community cannot afford to lose. The Grant statue at Fort Humboldt. I don't have a lot of information on this one. I believe the statue was created as part of the Days of General Grant festivities held in Eureka in the 30s. There's postcard photos that show the statue in cannons that date from the 40s, but it seems to have vanished sometime after this. I don't know where it disappeared to, only that I had heard that the statue and cannon were stolen or disappeared overnight. If anyone has any word, or if your neighbor has an interesting lawn ornament, maybe it looks like Grant, let me know. The monuments and symbols that we as people choose to leave behind are not accidents. Whether we're talking about statues of a war hero like Grant, someone we admire and respect, or statues of a fallen leader like McKinley, someone who was honored and whose loss was mourned, we're leaving to posterity the symbols of who we are. It's the same when we place statues of justice on our courthouse. We're sending a message to the future about the values that we hold dear and the way we want to be remembered. These are hard messages to keep intact when the building is demolished or the memorial left to be dissolved by nature. Our county's history and heritage should be remembered and preserved for future generations. The maintenance and preservation of our historic structures and monuments should be prioritized. This is Centerville in 1964. Besides showing a whole bunch of water, it also shows the memorial cross placed on the hill in memory of the 38 people who lost their lives on the Northerner when it wrecked on 6 January 1860. Here's the same spot a few years later. And today. The cross, originally erected by the Ferndale Parlor of the Native Sons of the Golden West in 1921, was damaged in the 1992 earthquakes and had been replaced. That's why there's two crosses. Since that time, the hillside where these crosses had stood for nearly 100 years overlooking the Pacific has been almost entirely consumed by the sea. The crosses have been dragged down the hill and dumped at the road's edge, but have been rendered homeless. If anyone has a good spot for these historic memorials, let us know, or contact the Native Sons. If you have a beachfront property overlooking the Pacific, somewhere between Table Bluff and Centerville, and you want a big cement cross in your yard, this is why we get a B- or a C+. This is why it's so important to keep preserving what we have left and to keep supporting the organizations that we have that do such an amazing job as the custodians of our history. Support your local nonprofit groups struggling to do great work on your behalf. The Clark Museum, the Humboldt County Historical Society, the Timber Heritage Association, and all of the other tiny nonprofits in our area. We depend on you, our community, to help us preserve our history. Thank you.
you.